As our region continues to grow at one of the fastest clips in the nation, is transportation infrastructure keeping up? This week, a conversation with the leader of MetroPlan Orlando, the Metropolitan planning body for Orange, Osceola and Seminole counties. Gary Huttmann joins me to talk about his organization's vision, what's realistic, and whether our region can build a truly integrated transportation system. This is Talking Central Florida. Hello, I'm Steve Mort, and welcome to the show where we take a closer look at the news in your region and community. And joining me in the studio is Gary Huttmann, Executive Director of MetroPlan Orlando. Thanks so much for being here, Gary.
Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. For those who aren't familiar with MetroPlan Orlando, just give us your kind of elevator speech on what your organization is and does.
Sure. Well, we're a creature of the federal government, really, that was created back in the early 70s. And we operate in Orange, Osceola, and Seminole County. I work actually for a board of directors made up of, 22 members, primarily elected officials
so you've
throughout
got a lot
the three
of bosses.
counties. Yes.
Yeah.
And we try and balance transportation funding throughout the region so that everybody gets their fair share, but it's still based on performance and where the greatest needs are.
And that body that governs you is sort of local government leaders, things like that?
Yes. It's in fact, in Orange County, we have the mayor and all of the county commissioners serve. Seminole County, we have 2 county commissioners, the mayor of Sanford, the mayor of Altamont Springs. In Osceola County, we have 2 of the county commissioners, one representing the county, the other sits on our board as a representative of Lynx.
So let's talk about transportation then. I want to start with rail. The 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, that's your sort of umbrella plan for the region, emphasizes multimodal connectivity. How much of a part of that do you see rail playing?
Hopefully it plays a significant part. You know, we have the spine going. There's a lot of interest in...
Spine being SunRail.
Being SunRail, yes. And there's a lot of interest in expanding that. And you've often hear about the Sunshine Corridor, and that is work that would be the beginning of expansion of rail service. But we could expand this not just with rail. I mean, we could actually expand the transit map with other east-west connections. We've done a number of studies over the years on bus rapid transit that would be reasonable connections to the SunRail system. But the big project that's out there right now is the Sunshine Corridor, connecting the airport to the attractions.
Yeah, I want to talk about bus rapid transit in a moment, but let's just stick with the Sunshine Corridor for a moment. As you say, that sort of proposed connection between the airport, attractions area, SunRail trains could eventually, I guess, run to the airport as part of that vision, possibly Brightline trains running onto Disney and then down to Tampa. This is a multi-billion-dollar project, though, right? And it's been discussed for years now. Do we know where that project stands now in terms of funding, approvals, timeline, that kind of thing?
Well, the most recent push is to get the project development and environmental study done, what we refer to as PD&E.
PD&E, yeah.
And the funding partners have stepped up to fund that. And they asked us, MetroPlan, to get involved in the communications aspect, working with the DOT on making sure that the public was well aware of this. And we had a meeting with the district DOT secretary on that. And so we welcome that. We've been talking for a number of years about our interest in being a bigger player, that is the organization being a bigger player in SunRail. And so this invited us kind of to the table on that, and we were excited about that. But it has since moved from the district to the central office. And I've not heard a lot about advancing that PD&E. I think the partners are waiting for some action from the DOT central office, as we are too.
The PD&E study, that is what we heard last year about when we were hearing that various municipalities, City of Orlando, different counties, the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board were giving a couple of million each, right, to that effort.
Yeah, I think the total on that was like 6 or 6.5 million for the PD&E. Those are expensive, very detailed pieces of work that are necessary necessary.
So that's currently where it is. Do you get a sense of how supportive, though, the federal government is in terms of funding this? Because this is going to require federal money when it comes down to it.
Absolutely. They're very expensive projects. I think there's an interest from the federal government because of the local and regional support for this, and stepping up and funding this initial piece of the study says a lot, and it sends a serious message to Washington, D.C. that Central Florida is ready, and we're participating in it.
Is the state supportive? I mean, whenever I hear officials from the state talk, they seem very focused on roads. Just sort of walk us through the kind of reasons why you think the state is supportive of this kind of large-scale rail infrastructure in Central Florida.
Well, because roads can only do so much, and it is the Department of Transportation, which is more than roads. But you're correct in that the state, in the past, has questioned the local commitment to rail. But I think that we've demonstrated that here in Central Florida, and the ridership numbers on SunRail are good. I mean, there are times of the day when I use it that you have to hunt for a seat,
Sure.
and certainly from an agency standpoint, they would like to have the seats full with every route they take. But
it has struggled with ridership, hasn't it, though?
Yeah, it struggled. And then COVID, impacted that, and I think that there's still some impact from change in work habits. A lot of people work different schedules and have some more flexibility in their schedules. So it still needs to serve, people need to be able to make it work for them.
I mean, overall, though, I wonder what those gaps are in the current system that the Sunshine Corridor would look to solve. I mean, is it trying to get to the airport? Is it trying to boost ridership locally? Is it being more accommodating for tourists? What is it trying to achieve?
Well, I think it's a bit of all of that. It's getting tourists from the airport to their destination, the reason that they're in Central Florida, without the need to get a rental car necessarily. It is also serving workers at the tourism at the attractions area, as well as workers at the airport. And then also local people that go to the airport. Parking is an issue at the airport, and if people could get there conveniently and efficiently using rail, I think a lot of people would choose to do that.
How important do you think integration with Brightline is to making that corridor viable? This, I guess, goes to the tourism part of the people visiting maybe from South Florida. Is it important to have Brightline as part of that Sunshine Corridor proposal, have an intersection between Brightline and SunRail, do you think?
Well, I think it's good to have the partnership. But perhaps, we don't work that closely with Brightline, but I would think that the bigger interest from Brightline is kind of considering that kind of the first leg of getting to Tampa.
Are we confident? I mean, this area's growing really fast, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of construction around. Are we confident by the time this all sort of gets ready for construction that right-of-way is still going to be there?
Well, MetroPlan has no land use control. That's certainly, but our members do.
Yeah.
The board members in their jurisdictions have that land use control. So it's it's a threat. I imagine that the right-of-way, if it lingers too long before some action and serious action is taken, that right-of-way accessibility could be impacted.
You kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but I wonder if you have a ballpark idea about how long this is all going to take. And given that sort of projected growth, are we building rail infrastructure fast enough to keep up?
Well, transportation projects, all transportation projects take a long time. I mean,
unless you're in China.
Well, yeah. Even if you had the money, even if the money was there, the funding was there, all of the preliminary work that's necessary to get these projects moving, it all takes time. But rail, I'd like to think that rail is a big piece of the infrastructure for long-term sustainability of Central Florida. You know, people are continuing to come. You can feel it when you're on the road.
Just tell us a little bit, if you can, before we move on, about the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. I guess I probably should have asked you that right off the top. Just tell us what that sort of umbrella plan is.
Well, that's a look at all modes of transportation throughout our region between current year and 2050. What we did leading up to our actually kicking off our work on the plan, the preliminary work we did was a series of what we call modal plans. We had an active transportation master plan. We had a transportation systems management and operations master plan. We had a freight master plan, and we worked with links on transit. So that when it came time to actually developing the highway portion of the 2050 plan, we knew what those other needs were, because the active transportation piece and the technology piece are especially important.
Yep.
So that when we go to the road piece, we don't do things and we have information in front of us to hopefully to avoid some mistakes on the highway side. The active transportation piece is really critical, and it's really critical now as we move into the e-mobility generation.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a moment. We'll put a link to MetroPlan's 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan in the podcast feed. Show notes. Be sure to like and subscribe to Talking Central Florida. You can listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and watch on YouTube at Talking Central Florida. Let's turn to other forms of public transit then, and I want to start with buses. Your plan stresses integration, as we've mentioned, between different modes of transportation. How well do you think are bus and rail connections actually working today for riders?
Well, people need to be patient. You know, I don't think it's not a mature system. Mm-hmm. Although SunRail's been running now in May, it will be 14 years, 12 years, that it's been operating.
When does it come mature then?
I don't have an answer for that. But when you use it, I use it just about every day.
Yeah.
And sometimes you still get the feeling that it's sort of an attraction to people. You know, they get on it and they don't treat it like it's a utility. We still have issues of people that perhaps linger at the stations, and the conductors on the trains do the best they can to kind of get people moving so that the dwell times are not too long. But it's a matter of people getting used to how transit operates and what the expectations are of the users of transit. That's important. The bus connections, could be better, but bus transit is evolving as well. You know, there's less of a reliance on the huge 48, 50 passenger fixed route buses.
Yep.
As we see with Seminole County.
The microtransit options.
Microtransit.
Yeah, well, how's that working then? I mean, Seminole County severed a lot of those Lynx bus connections. Basically a small bus now, right, that you can hail with an app, much like a sort of a ride share. I mean, what are you learning from that experience so far? I mean, it seems like passengers are still waiting quite a long time.
Well, I don't know about that, but I can tell you that we are talking with Seminole County and have a meeting scheduled sometime, I think, in April. They've asked us to come forward and do some work with them on kind of the analysis to date of that system, because it is very new. But from what I hear, they're pleased with the results. I know that they have ordered since they've started, they have additional vehicles on the street from when they started because of the demand.
Yeah.
But, it's operating in the traffic that everybody else is. So if there are delays, likely to be caused by congestion.
Do you think it's something that can grow and be a part of the overall transportation puzzle in Central Florida over time?
I think it can. I mean, I think there are probably routes. Transit, the fixed route transit can't be the solution to problems throughout such a large area. I mean, we cover 2,500 square miles, and when Lynx gets a call for service for someone that lives kind of outside, further out, and they want to provide that service, but it adds to the cost, and it's just extremely expensive to be able to provide that service. And I think the systems similar to Scout.
Scout, sorry, that is the name of the microtransit system in Seminole County.
Systems similar to that could go a long way in meeting people's mobility needs.
You mentioned these services sitting in the same traffic as everyone else. You also mentioned bus rapid transit earlier, so I wonder whether buses do have to sit in the same traffic as everyone else. What about the idea of having infrastructure built for buses? You have their own lanes, maybe walled off, their own stations. That seems to be, compared to building a rail, a pretty inexpensive way of developing transportation quickly.
It is less expensive, less costly than a rail system, and it does have some of the attraction of a light rail system if it's done correctly with low floor buses and ease of access, getting on and off, and Wi-Fi and being able to work while you're on there. But there's been studies that we've been involved with DOT on and with Lynx on for bus rapid transit and how it would work between the airport and the attractions. We looked at it before Brightline came along. There's been a study that was a really good study, had positive ridership numbers going on State Road 50 from the Orange Lake County line out to the UCF main campus.
Yeah. A lot of traffic on that route.
A lot of traffic. That study was done before the UCF downtown campus was built, before it was even announced. But we couldn't use the numbers from the downtown campus for the study. But in spite of that, it had good ridership numbers. But again, that was going to be a system operating in mixed traffic, but with I think what they called bat lanes, that shared lanes between the bus and vehicles that were turning into a site.
Yeah.
And that, so it wouldn't be entirely in mixed traffic. You'd have a little bit of vehicular traffic mixing with the buses. We've also looked at a bus rapid transit in Osceola County along 192, which was it was going to be a median running system.
Again, another fast-growing area with a lot of traffic.
Yeah, and a big need there. And it had a lot of excitement during the study phase, but then there was sticker shock, when it came down to the cost.
Well, is that the reason why we just don't see these things coming to fruition? Is it just sticker shock each time? We don't see any of these buses. We study them a lot. We don't see them happen.
Yeah, I think in the case of the 192, it was a sticker shock.
Yeah.
In the case of State Road 50, it was just a readiness. And in the case of BRT between the airport and the convention center and the tourist areas, that project always. There was always something else that was attractive that came along. Originally, it was a monorail kind of system, privately funded. Then it was, I think, a light rail system that, again, was going to be privately funded. And then Brightline comes along. So
Has Brightline made the attraction of, or sort of the concept of funding something 100% privately very attractive to people? I mean, obviously, if the government doesn't have to spend any money, the government likes that, right?
Yeah, that's attractive.
But it's not necessarily realistic for all transportation projects.
No, I don't think so. It's going to take public funds to get these projects up and running.
Could autonomous services like Waymo, do you think, and we saw some news recently that service is now operating in at least parts of the metro area. Could services like Waymo, do you think, try to help solve some of those last mile gaps that is the problem. But when you get to a terminus of a transportation system, getting from there to where you're going, do you see those kinds of services as offering part of the solution to our transportation puzzle?
I think it is a part, and it depends on what we call I think we kind of generically refer to the distance between a station and where you need to be as the last mile. It could be the last 2 or 3 miles, and they may play a bigger part for that. The e-mobility plays a part for that. So it's there's not one answer. I think it's a mix, and I think the autonomous services such as Waymo and others that come along can be a part of that mix.
The other part of the puzzle that you have to try to think about, of course, is ensuring that these options, when you develop transportation options, they are benefiting transit-dependent communities, areas where maybe people don't have their own form of transportation, where there are fewer, car owners, and that you're not just benefiting tourists, higher income riders, that kind of thing. Yeah. How do you go about juggling that kind of equation in your planning?
Well, we just had a discussion about that at our last board meeting. We do this report called Tracking the Trends, where we watch what's going on and we report out on it. And we were asked a question about the transportation disadvantaged and how are we accommodating them? And it was a tough question because we didn't have an answer prepared for it. It's something that we're looking into. The folks that are totally dependent on transit, the elderly, those with a disability of one kind or another. I don't know that we'll ever get the human factor out of transporting them, and that's what drives the cost of some of those services up. Is the fact that you have to have someone, an operator that is sensitive to the needs of the people that they're transporting, and so e-mobility, autonomous vehicles, I don't believe are the answer to all of that need.
Well, be sure to join us on social media for more discussion on the issues we're talking about here on the show. We're at Talking Central Florida on Instagram and Facebook. Let's turn to roads and talk a bit more about that in detail. Most visions for Central Florida still call for major roadway investments. The state continues to spend heavily on roads, while pledging, for example, not to spend money, say, on the train from Orlando to Tampa. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of sticker shock when it comes to spending on roads. How do you balance that with sort of reducing car dependence and traffic? Reducing traffic seems to be central to a lot of the transportation planning we talk about. Can we do that, though, when we spend so much on roads?
Well, they're all expensive, and the roads that are built, transportation planning has changed over the last very recently, and certainly I've seen in my career major changes in the way transportation planning and long-range transportation planning is done. People are more sensitive to the impact of roads and the impact that has on people that ride bicycles, that people that walk, trying to cross the street. There's only so much you can do with roads. And in our region, a lot of what we do is kind of retrofitting existing corridors. State Road 50 right outside of the station here. I don't know that you'll ever see additional lanes added to that.
It's just not really the space.
Yeah. But through technology, whether that's through autonomous vehicles that can operate more efficiently because they can move more people, similar to buses, and not have to worry about spacing between vehicles. But road construction continues to be a need in the region, and it will continue to be that way. But hopefully, we'll be able to address a lot of the problems with technology, with micromobility, with autonomous vehicles. The tools that we have to work with to solve the problem it's growing. I mean, our use of those tools is growing.
Yeah, and I mean, critics of road expansion say, look. roads are all well and good, but they, at the end of the day, they induce traffic. That sort of induced demand, I guess, is something that transportation planners talk about. Is it real, do you think? Do you think the more you build roads, the more traffic you get?
Yeah, when you build a road, a lot of times critics of road building say, well, why do it? Because it's going to fill up as soon as you cut the ribbon, it's going to be full. And they complain about that. But on the transit side, if it's not full, then they complain about an empty bus or an empty train. But we do market research at MetroPlan Orlando. We do market research every couple of years, and it's generally the even years.
Okay.
So we are kicking that off. In fact, I believe it's open now for people to get on our website and participate as a survey respondent. But in that, we ask people questions about their feelings about road building and their feelings about transit and funding. And we ask all sorts of questions. And we do the same questions over the years so that we can see trends. And we always get positive responses about more transit, more bikes and ped accommodations, spend less on road building. But then it comes down to, how things are funded. And even though through our market research we show that there's an overwhelming support for less road building and more sort of multimodal approaches to solving the problem, when it comes time to pay for that, you don't see that reflected in people.
Yeah, that's interesting. But they don't object necessarily when it's, there are billions announced for a road building project. I mean, for example, CFX, Central Florida Expressway Authority, is spending a huge amount of money on this sort of southern beltway to accommodate all that new development, Sunbridge and Lake Nona and all of that kind of thing in that area. We don't hear a lot of conversation about that, but when, somebody suggests we spend X number of billion on a railway, what you're saying is that people, I guess because what they're used to, kind of view that differently.
Yeah, I think they see it as money not well spent.
Yeah.
Because I think transit takes a bad rap for not being full. The buses or the train cars are not full, and therefore it's a waste of money. But that's they're welcome to those opinions, but it takes time to grow that, over time. And I'm confident that SunRail numbers are going to continue to be on an upward trend.
You've kind of alluded to this a little bit, and the technology in the future, and maybe how that can help us with some of these traffic issues. Transportation planners sometimes refer to sort of smart traffic systems, things like AI, sensors, cameras, vehicle-to-infrastructure communication to manage traffic. What role do you think that kind of technology plays in kind of achieving the kind of goals you want to achieve?
Yeah. Well, we've had what's called adaptive signal control in the region, throughout the region for a number of years. And that's where the signals respond to the traffic volumes throughout the day. So there's some adjustments there that are made. And that's all part of smart transportation. The use of AI and how that applies to making even more advancements is something that's still being discussed and still out there. The interesting thing that I see about artificial intelligence, very recently, as recent probably as 3 or 4 years ago, I remember being at events where we would have attorneys talking about the risks of relying too heavily on artificial intelligence, and it seems to have just rapidly become so widespread that it's just in everyday. It's part of everyday talk. That we refer to it and use it. But we also had discussion at our last board meeting on how AI can come into traffic management and play an even more significant role. So it's something that we'll look at and continue to look at.
But you're pretty certain it's going to play a role?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about pedestrians and cyclists. Tell us a little bit about Vision Zero. What is that?
The Vision Zero effort that we had here in Central Florida has been widely successful, and it's gotten a lot of very positive feedback throughout the state and throughout the United States because of the approach that we took to it. And MetroPlan Orlando received the grant from the discretionary grant from the Federal Highway. And we added to that the local match. We made the local match. But what our Vision Zero effort involved was developing one regional kind of an umbrella safety action plan, as well as 3 separate county action plans and 19 municipal safety action plans, all together, all at the same time, working together. And we referred to it as a top-down, bottom-up approach.
And the mission is to reduce pedestrian deaths. Correct?
Yes, to identify countermeasures to the problem, and then implement those countermeasures over a period of time. And that's going to be a lot of our work now, from now going forward, is monitoring that and implementing the countermeasures that are identified in those safety action plans.
Well, let's talk about some of the possible countermeasures. Just anecdotally, from what I observe, I mean, many areas still seem to lack basic sidewalks, bike infrastructure. You can still have to walk large distances in some cases to reach crosswalks. There seem to be precious few bridges for pedestrians. These all seem, to me at least, and tell me if I'm wrong, pretty easy things to put in place to help pedestrians. Why are we not seeing all kinds of crosswalks and bridges being built all the time?
Well, again, it's cost, and the thing on safety...
It doesn't cost very much, does it, just to build a bridge over a road?
It's expensive.
Yeah.
It's expensive. We've talked about safety, throughout my career here in Central Florida, but never as seriously, I don't believe, as we have in the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
And we are now putting resources to it. And in fact, MetroPlan Orlando receives an allocation that comes to us. We are the sub-recipients of a pot of federal money that we're using and for safety improvements. And in fact, part of our 2050 plan makes some of that money. Our intention on the use of those funds is to fund off what we refer to as off-system improvements. That is on locally operated roads, not on the state road network. But we have identified a portion of that money to assist the state in funding countermeasures on state-owned facilities, and we did that because that's where most of our problems occur on the bigger more highly trafficked, higher speed roads. So we're using some of that, what we call was essentially local funds, to help fund those countermeasures on state facilities.
What kind of countermeasures?
Well, it could be crosswalks that have the flashing beacons. Pedestrians push a button and wait for the signal to cross. Could be making retrofits to the road, narrowing lanes, encouraging people to slow down a bit, or putting some friction, some lateral friction in the area that doesn't give them a feeling that it's necessarily safe to be going 55 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone and stuff. So,
what about those? I really wanted to ask you about this. I've seen in some places fencing placed along roads. I'm thinking in particular along Alafaya Trail up by the University of Central Florida to prevent pedestrians from crossing the road. I guess it was an area where there was a large number of pedestrian traffic incidents. And it makes me think, wouldn't it be better and probably cheaper to put a crosswalk in there, or more crosswalks, rather than like forcing people to walk further up the street to a crosswalk that's already there and already quite dangerous because you've got to cross and there are cars turning against you and all that kind of thing? What's the thinking on these fences? And there may be a legitimate transportation planning reason why you wouldn't want to put crosswalks more frequently down the road. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, what's this fencing all about?
Well, the fencing is to channel the pedestrians to the safest place to cross. Now, you mentioned installing crosswalks. Is that cheaper than fencing? But in order to make just installing a crosswalk on a road like Alafaya Trail without any other traffic control is not really going to be that safe. Until the behavior of drivers and the behavior of pedestrians is kind of more in sync with who's got the right of way, and drivers actually watching out for people that may be using a crosswalk that does not have a signal that indicates that they're supposed
There's
to.
no flashing light.
Yeah.
How do you educate drivers on this?
I think with our safety action plans, the way that they were done, the region is so focused on safety that I think that message is getting out, and I think that people's behavior will change as more younger drivers come on the scene, and they kind of grew up with the safety message. People become more accustomed to driving like the people that are on the road with them, right? If you're speeding, or if someone's speeding, then you have a tendency to kind of follow them.
Yeah.
But if you're kind of being the pace car in your neighborhood, then others will hopefully follow that example.
I did want to ask you about a bill that was passed in the most recent legislative session with new rules on e-bikes and scooters. That includes slower speeds for those kinds of devices. Do you welcome that? And I wonder whether that kind of sort of statewide policy, when the state puts in new rules like that, whether that affects your planning.
Sometimes it does. We were actually advocating for the state to put those kind of restrictions so that there would be consistency as you cross, if you're on a trail, from one jurisdiction to another, and to avoid each jurisdiction having to do it on their own. The problem with that is you can give someone the rules, but then how do you enforce those? Whether a scooter or an e-bike is exceeding the speed, or if they're using their horn at the proper time, or how far they are away from pedestrians before they use the horn. Those all become enforcement issues, and then you sometimes get the attitude of why put the rules out if there's no.
And you need those tech companies themselves to be part of that process, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, but they are. Do you think e-scooters and bikes still an important part, maybe, of that last mile transportation puzzle?
Yes. Yeah. You see a lot of folks, older folks, perhaps retired, on SunRail with scooters folded up and a scooter, getting around as a means of transportation for that last mile or two. Yeah, I think that's a big part.
And we see jurisdictions like Winter Park, for example, considering whether to adopt their own rules. I want to wrap up now by sort of talking about how much improving transit comes down at the end of the day to land use decisions and how we actually live our lives, right? Rather than sort of transportation investments themselves. I mean, many people have long commutes still, for example, in our region. Do we need, at the end of the day, to change something more fundamental? Do we need to live and work in places that are closer together? Do planners need to do a better job of trying to foster that kind of living? Do we need to live differently?
Well, that would be helpful, certainly, because there's such a connection between land use and transportation, and if you can live and work in close proximity, that's great. MPOs like MetroPlan Orlando do not have any land use authority.
Right.
Although the current federal bill allows us to sort of get our nose under the tent, under the land use tent, And as we're looking at reauthorization for the next federal bill, that language could be strengthened so that federal dollars that we receive for our planning efforts could allow us to spend some of that money on housing and land use kind of issues. But then we would need to have the cooperation of the jurisdictions that you're not trying to take away anything from them. You're just trying to be more helpful, and we would have funds to be able to do that.
If we revisit this in 5 to 10 years, what specific indicators will you be looking at to try to assess whether the 2050 plan is actually working? If we talk again, I say, Gary, how's it looking? What will you be looking to assess whether or not you are making progress in the right direction?
Well, we do a lot of data collection. I mean, our work is there's just tons of data that goes into it. So it would be looking at bicycle and pedestrian numbers throughout the region. It would be looking at transit numbers throughout the region. It would be looking at, from a safety standpoint, we are working now to be able to separate out the e-mobility crashes from the normal bicycle crashes, and so we'd be able to evaluate how well that's working. Of course, we always collect numbers on vehicle volume counts, and those I don't think that we'll do anything to make those numbers go down.
Sure.
I think the evaluation of success will be in how the other numbers go up and how comfortable people feel using the network that we're providing in modes other than personal vehicles.
Well, we'll put lots of links to helpful information on the issues that we're talking about here today, but that is all the time we have. Gary Huttmann from MetroPlan Orlando, thank you so much for coming in.
Again, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. That's all the time we have. A reminder, you can support Talking Central Florida by clicking like and subscribe. Listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Talking Central Florida is a production of the News Collaborative of Central Florida with support from the Orlando Sentinel, the Winter Park Voice, the Central Florida Foundation, and Central Florida Public Media, where the show is recorded. We'll be back with a new episode next Wednesday. Hope you'll join us then. Take care.